It's my pleasure now to introduce Dr. Whitney Brim Deforest. She's a UCCE rice and wild rice advisor. I asked her what her specialty was for her PhD, and she says she's a weed specialist. And I said, well, gee, I don't know any farmers that have those issues. But anyway, we're happy that you bring that to the table. She's going to talk to us today about regenerative rice, but also about habitat development. And that's important just as a follow-up to Wynette's conversation. With that, Dr. Whitney Brim Deforest.
Thank you so much, Tim, for that introduction. I do love weeds, I've got to tell you. So if you have weed questions, please come to me. I love them too much, probably. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about rice and some of the research that we're currently working on. So with UC, we do a lot of research. So some of this is preliminary. Some of it may look a lot different than it looks in your fields. But we'll kind of take a little journey here. So I'm going to give a brief history of California rice systems, and then I'm going to talk about our current cover crop work and our hedgerow work. I wanted to include some of our no-till work that we're doing right now with drill-seeded systems, but I don't think I have quite enough time, so I'm sorry for that. So just a little bit of history. Probably most of you in this room know quite a bit about rice in California, but it turns out not everybody does. So we've been here in California rice for about 100 years. It was first introduced during the gold rush with Chinese immigrants. And it took a really long time for growers to start commercially planting rice. So the first commercial production actually didn't start until about 1912, and that was in Butte County here with some Swedish immigrants. So rice was grown for about maybe 20, 30 years before that, but the real commercial start was in 1912. So for those of you that are from Butte County, you probably know the Rice Experiment Station. So the Rice Experiment Station was established in 1912, and it's a unique setup. So I think it's kind of one of the coolest situations actually in terms of experiment stations. So it's actually not owned by the University of California. A lot of people think it is, but it is owned by the rice growers of California. And it was a deeded land over to the growers at that time in 1912, and it is a partnership. So University of California does work at the Rice Experiment Station, but the board is all growers. The growers employ the scientists there, and the scientists there breed rice varieties specifically for California. So it's a pretty unique system. Just to kind of preface the entire talk about cover crops here. So this is actually a study from Chico State, and I think this mapping was done quite a while ago. But just to look at, so this is what the land cover looked like pre-1900s. And you can see up here where we are in the Sac Valley, most of that was wetland. Okay, a little bit of grassland, some other floodplain habitat, but a whole lot of wetlands. Now, 100 years later, circa 1990, most of this is no longer wetlands. However, rice, because of the nature of the rice crop and that it grows well in aquatic systems, it's kind of taken over and acts as like a pseudo-wetland. So a lot of the things that we do, like Whitney was talking about with our flooding and things like that, kind of serve the same purpose as the wetlands used to serve 100 years ago. So our rice systems are continuously flooded. They are flooded primarily for weed control. So those of you that aren't familiar with rice does grow in dry systems. Most of us think of rice as a flooded crop, but it's really flooded for weed control. And in California, we flooded it to control barnyard grass. And since then, since the early 1900s, we've continued with that system. So it is mostly grown without rotation. Mostly we grow temperate rice varieties. The varieties are cold tolerant. We are a cold area for rice growing. Most of our soils are very easily waterlogged because of that, the area that we're growing in. So again, that's wetland soils. They're very heavy clay. and they get very waterlogged, and they're not easily rotated into a lot of other cropping systems. So we do rotate, but most of the rotation is in a certain part of the valley, kind of towards the southern end, down in Sutter County. Most of the area up here, Butte and Glenn counties, we don't really rotate. So this rice, followed by rice system, is really the system that we've done for about 100 years on most of our land. So that brings us to the question, in this flooded system where we're not crop rotating a whole lot, how do we incorporate some of our climate smart ag practices? So the thing that I've been working on for the past few years is cover cropping, and I'll go into it a little bit, the previous research that we've done before this point. We've done a little bit in hedgerows, just a very new project. And then we are working a bit on no-till and reduced tillage systems. But like I said, I won't be talking about that today. But if you're interested, I have a talk in a couple weeks, and we'll have a field day this summer. So a little bit about cover crops in California rice. So like I mentioned before, our soils are very different, and so it makes it a little bit more complicated to do cover cropping. Prior to the work that we've been doing in the past couple years, the most recent data was actually about 20 years old. Prior to that, a lot of the research was done in the 1950s. Many of our legume species don't survive super well in our flooded, wet, waterlogged soils. We're cover cropping during the winter. We can't really cover crop during the rice season. That would be very difficult. And a lot of our growers, therefore, have difficulty with varietal selection. So a few years ago, I was getting a lot of questions. You know, I'm putting out these cover crops, and everything's dying. What do I do? And at the time, I didn't really have a lot of good answers. So some of the challenges as well, we have rice straw. The rice straw is silica in it. And so at the end of the season, that rice straw doesn't break down super well. So that's another complication. So growers are dealing with straw at the end of the season, and then how do they get rid of that straw and then plant cover crops in that sort of waterlogged, straw-ridden environment. It can be very complicated. Also, there's some increased greenhouse gas production in waterlogged soils, right? That's different than a dryland system. So when we're adding biomass to that system, we're actually somewhat increasing methane emissions. We are increasing methane emissions. So there's a lot of trade-offs with this system. Another big issue is increased management costs. I'm not going to address that today, but we are doing some work on the cost of cover cropping and rice systems, and it is significant for us. Not only the cost of the seed, but we have a lot of extra steps that we have to go through in order to be able to implement cover cropping. So like I mentioned, the most current data for cover crops is from 1996, and we have data on woolly pod vetch, purple vetch, and bell bean. There was a couple other things that folks tried before. There were some folks that used to plant wheat in some areas, but this is really what we have and what we have data for. So growers were asking a few years ago, can we get some data for other varieties, for other species? And that's kind of where some of this research came from. Actually, some of the work that we did back in the 90s was done actually with the sills. I don't have that data, but some of that's presented in this same paper here. But you can see they were looking at purple vetch, Lana vetch, and bell bean, and comparing it to or with increasing fertilizer rates. So this was the latest data that we had from 1996, so a long time ago. Different varieties, different sort of systems at that time. So a few years ago, we started a cover crop variety trial. This was funded by the California Rice Research Board. A big team of us here, and actually, if you guys are interested, the graduate student working on this project, Consuelo Baez Vega, will be here later tonight. She's a Chico State master's student, and she's got a poster somewhere back there, and she'll be there to talk about her work as well. But there's a very big team of us working on this project together across the valley. So the point of the research was first evaluating winter cover crop varieties for agronomic performance. So how well did they do? Did they produce biomass? Do they produce nitrogen, et cetera? And then we're also looking at site characteristics. So since we've got sites across the Sacramento Valley, we're trying to figure out, are there differences in soil properties, differences in water retention, things like that, that might relate to the performance of these different cover crops. So we have 3 sites. One is at the Rice Experiment Station in Biggs. We've got one in Colusa County, and then one actually down in San Joaquin. So there's not a whole lot of rice grown down in San Joaquin, but it's a very different environment than up here. And so we wanted to make sure we were able to kind of cover the breadth of rice growing areas. San Joaquin, for those of you that might not have been down there, the rice soils down there are very different than they are up here, probably closer to peat, and they do hold a lot of water. The water table is very high compared to up here. So each of our growers were doing something slightly different, and we've kind of been following what they're doing. So at the experiment station, we have control over this. So all of our fields were in rice and then planted in cover crop. In Colusa, the grower was doing a variety of different things. So the first year, she was actually in a fallow prior to the cover cropping, and then rice the 2 years after that. All of our variety trials were broadcast seeded by hand. The area around the trials was broadcast seeded in some cases, drill seeded in others, and I'll talk a little bit about that afterwards. San Joaquin, they do rotate, so they actually were in corn before we started this trial, and then rice the 2 years after that. So different methods based on kind of what the growers were doing. So again, we're looking at, do cover crops survive over the winter period? This is a big question in rice systems. We're also trying to see if there's enough carbon nitrogen content to make this worthwhile, biomass production, and then again relating that to soil moisture, location, and then we want to be able to provide some really specific recommendations based on soil properties. And then honestly, the big question is, does anything survive when the fields get really waterlogged? So this is the trial in Colusa there, and you can see how we set it up. So pretty small plots, but again, we're evaluating a number of different varieties. So these are the species that we chose. Primarily, quite a few legumes. Obviously, our growers are mostly interested in cover cropping for nitrogen production. So we've got purple vetch, woolly pod vetch as sort of our standards, bell bean, balansa clover, field pea, and then I have biomaster pea as well down here. We've got a couple of brassicas. Folks weren't quite as interested in the brassicas, but we wanted to be able to at least show them what happens when we plant brassicas. And then rye and oats. We also had some mixes, and this is honestly what most of the growers are doing. They're doing mixes and sort of hedging their bets. So when one thing doesn't survive, hopefully something else survives. This was the seeding rates. These are all taken from the literature. It may not reflect exactly what growers are doing in the field. We were told, or have been told, that our rates are pretty high compared to other people's rates. So, but again, these were literature-based, and at the end of this year, when we finish up all of our trials, we're going to be doing a working group with growers that are cover cropping, and we'll try to tease out some of this information about how our practices might have differed from what they're doing. So looking at the first couple years of data here. So we took germination and emergence counts about a month after planting. And you can see there's quite a bit of data here. This is the first year. So Butte, Colusa, and San Joaquin. So Butte is in green, Colusa is in purple, and San Joaquin is in blue. So again, this is about a month after planting, and these are counts of plants. So counts per 20 centimeter squared quadrat. So that first year, things looked pretty good a month after planting in both Butte and Colusa. The rye looked really good, the turnip looked good, even the mustards looked good. But I don't know if you all remember this year, but we got a lot of rain in the month of December. So we were very excited and we planted our cover crops, and then it rained and rained and rained and rained. So especially in San Joaquin, that 10 inches of rain that we got in the month of December wiped out the cover crop. So like I said, it looked great about a month in, and then a month later, it was gone. So San Joaquin got the most rain. Colusa and Butte both got quite a bit of rain as well. and you'll see that reflected in the percent cover a little bit later. Year 2 looked a bit better. Again, a month in, balansa clover looked really good, turnip, yellow mustard, and the mixes all looked pretty good. Slightly less rain this second year in the month of December. And what we're beginning to really understand here is that something we can't control at all, but the rain is really going to make or break us in rice and cover cropping. So if you can hit it sort of at a sweet spot where you plant and then it doesn't rain a whole lot for a little while, then your cover crops can kind of take off. If it rains a ton right after planting, you're kind of toast, unfortunately. Year 3 also looked pretty good about a month in. That's this current year. But right after planting, we had a similar issue. So we planted, and I don't know if you folks remember, but we had about 10 days of rain, like all at once. And so we got a ton of rain, and unfortunately in Butte County, we got a lot of rain, and that entire trial was wiped out. So again, we're just kind of learning right now. This is a big learning experience for us, and we're realizing that this is going to be a difficult thing to implement cover cropping in rice. So looking at year 1 in Calusa, the oats are really the only thing that ended up looking very good. So we got quite a bit of biomass. So again, remembering back that first year, it rained a lot. And again, the only thing that really survived was the oats. The mixes looked okay because some of them also had oats in them. But the mix 2, which didn't have any oats, didn't look very good at all. So mix 3 had oats, and most of that biomass production was from the oats. Because I'm a weed scientist, I'm also looking at weeds. So I mean, weeds could be a cover crop, correct? Oh my gosh, I gotta talk faster here. Weeds could be a cover crop. So we did look at biomass production and carbon and nitrogen content and everything in the weeds, just for curiosity's sake. The total carbon input from the oats was pretty high. Nitrogen input, not so high in comparison. Obviously, it's not a nitrogen fixer. Year 2, when we got a lot less rain, the bell beans and the vetches did very well. And so we saw really high carbon input and pretty good nitrogen input. And again, these are the varieties that everyone's been planting for a long time, and we can kind of see why. In San Joaquin, similarly looked really good. Balansa clover looked a little bit better. Purple vetch and woolly pod vetch again. So we're getting quite a bit of nitrogen input, and I think I have a slide about how much. So like I mentioned, rainfall has a huge impact on germination and stand establishment, particularly of the legumes. When well established, that nitrogen production is about 20 to 40 pounds per acre. That's about 10 to 25% of our total N required for rice. So it's not enough to make up the whole amount of N that you need, but a pretty good chunk. Carbon nitrogen ratios are about 10 to 1 to 20 to 1 for legumes, so pretty good ratios there. And again, higher for grasses, which can lead to some potential nitrogen tie-up. The other big thing is that one of the things that we've noticed is that biomass production is incredibly variable across the field. And so that can lead to really high nitrogen spots in some areas and low nitrogen spots in other areas, which can be hard to manage for during the rice season. Okay. There's an example there of our incredibly flooded out field. You can barely see the cover crop poking up there. So I'm going to go really quickly through this one, but we do have a larger field size trial, about 20 acres at each of these sites, where we're looking at some other, or gathering some other information. And again, I won't go into this in great detail, but this one we're comparing the cover crop to the normal grower practices over the winter to be able to kind of see soil, nitrogen cycling, carbon cycling like that. So same project, but much bigger basins at those 3 sites. Okay, I'm going to talk really fast now about our hedgerow. So this is a project I'm working on with Sarah Light, who's actually going to be speaking next. So one of the difficulties with hedgerows and rice is because of the continuously flooded system, we can't put a hedgerow in a rice field. It's just not possible. So our hedgerows have to go on the edges of fields and rice. There's some difficulties here, irrigation, cost of labor for transplanting and all those things. So it can be very costly. We don't have a cost analysis done yet, but that's one of the things we'll be probably looking at in the future. This is the very first year of this project, so the data is very preliminary. Some of the benefits, levee weed control. So we were talking about Johnson grass and things like that earlier. We get a lot of Johnson grass on our levees in rice, so this might be a potential way to suppress weeds. Maybe some beneficial insects, some predators that eat some of our other insects. Improve soil health perhaps as well on the levees. So this levee is located in Colusa County on the edge of a grower field, and we'll be having a field day actually, I think next week or the week after. So if folks are interested, please come out. This hedgerow is 275 feet long, and we have an untreated control area next to it, which is just, we're leaving it to grow as it will. Whatever grows there is what grows there. The setup is willows in the middle, coffeeberry on either side, and then deer grass on the outside edges. So again, this is the very first hedgerow we've ever done in rice in California for research purposes, so it's very preliminary, and we're just kind of seeing what happens. So I mentioned before, it's on the edge of a rice field. You can kind of see this is a levee up here, and then there's like a dip, and this is where we planted the hedgerow. So one of the big issues is keeping the weeds down. So we did mow before we planted in the fall, and then before we planted the actual plants in the spring, we did use herbicide to kind of hopefully do a burn down. They've come back, obviously. We did use some fertilizer, urea at the beginning, and then all summer, last summer, and this summer as well, we'll be irrigating. So we have drip irrigation set up here to help us irrigate. There is a irrigation ditch, a big one on this side, so we have a pump that pumps over here and then irrigates via drip. The plants, we've got deer grass, like I mentioned before. These are all California natives. So deer grass on the outer edges, coffeeberry here, and then willow, arroyo willow, and then we've also got some poppies, although these haven't germinated quite yet, but the rest of these are all transplanted. All this is based on some work by Rachel Long, who those of you that have been in California a while probably know her. So again, this is kind of looking at it from the top. This was year one, and you can see like, there's a lot of weeds, right? So weed control is a big issue, and we'll have a speaker on weed control in hedgerows actually at our meeting next week. I'm going to skip through this since I have the slides here. So some of our preliminary results, we looked at survivability. So over the 3 months, the one species that seemed to have a bit of difficulty was the coffeeberry. Not really sure why. It could have been due to transplant error, could have been just environment. We're not totally sure, but we did have a little bit of die-off. Not so much, the deer grass did great, and then a little bit with the willow. And this slide is kind of busy, I'm sorry, but we're looking at weeds over the course of the season. So here's our control area here and our hedgerow here. These are grass species. We've got straw here in the dark orange. These are soil, and then up here is broadleaves. So over the course of the season, so that was May, June, July, and August. By August, you can see that the control area had shifted to pretty much straw, which was dead grass, whereas the hedgerow area had a significant broadleaf population. So you can see it kind of grow over the 4 months. So again, we'll be doing this again this year and taking more data. And the grower actually said that we could take as much data as we wanted for as long as we wanted. So we'll be taking more data as long as they allow. I'm only going to briefly touch on some of the insect data. So we've been doing pitfall traps, sweeping as well, and sticky traps, and we're collecting data every month. Just real quickly here, we didn't see many differences. This is the pitfall traps. The really only big difference we saw was with the hedgerow in September, where we're having a high population of isopods for whatever reason. But again, this is preliminary data, and we might see differences more in the future. With the sticky traps, we really only saw an increase in Diptera, which is flies, towards the end of this season. And again, not really sure what this means quite yet. My colleague Luis is the person working on the entomology portion of this, so we don't know exactly how these might impact rice systems as of yet. We're sweeping in the rice fields, so 40 feet out, 80 feet out, and 120 feet out. And again, most of what we're seeing a difference in is the diptera, the flies, over the course of the season. And by the end of the season, we had a much larger diptera population in the hedgerow area. So, okay, so in summary, we're seeing a big increase in broadleaf weeds in the hedgerow area over the course of the summer, probably because of our irrigation. The main weed species, unfortunately, we saw some not great ones. So we've got yellow star thistle, field bindweed, both things that we don't really want growing there. Some fluellen as well, which is not a great one either. And then some that are not quite as bad, but are present. Some increase in diptera, which are hoverflies, which can be a positive. We are collecting herbicide phytotoxicity data, and we didn't see any effects of the rice herbicides on the hedgerow. We have had a lot of problems with irrigation. The rodents and now the coyotes really seem to love the drip line. So that's probably been the biggest source of issues for us over the season. And then the last one is if you are planning to do a hedgerow in rice, you have to make sure your trees aren't too tall because we're using planes to fly on seed and other things. So tree species have to be short. Okay, and I think that's it. Am I on time or mostly? Okay, so quite a few acknowledgements, and then just if people are interested, there's our hedgerow and soil health field day, which will be on the edge of that field with the hedgerow. And then if you're interested in no-till stuff, I am speaking next week at the Butte County Fairgrounds on no-till. So that's it. Thank you so much.